Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned into Radio Free Earth, broadcasting live from, well, let's just say an undisclosed location. If you're hearing this, it means you're among the dwindling number of survivors who can still access electricity, or perhaps you've scavenged a working radio. Hold on to it tightly, because it's one of the few links left to a world that's rapidly tearing itself apart. It is day 12 since the outbreak of World War III. Yes, I said it, World War III. What we once thought was the stuff of apocalyptic fiction is now unfolding before our very eyes. Cities are burning, skies are filled with the wails of sirens and the dull hum of jets carrying their lethal payloads. And humanity seems to have abandoned itself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Just a few short weeks ago, though it feels like an eternity, the tensions had been simmering for months between two global superpowers. It started over a border dispute, as these things often do. A skirmish at first, just two nations rattling sabers, testing each other's limits. Then came the incursion. One side accused the other of violating their sovereign territory. Troops were mobilized, weapons drawn, and then escalation. Reports came in of missile strikes on border towns. Civilian casualties started mounting. Entire villages were wiped off the map overnight. Families fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs, seeking shelter in overcrowded camps that were little more than tarps and dirt. And yet, even then, we thought it might stay contained. But we were wrong. Within days, allied nations took sides. Smaller countries with no stake in the conflict were dragged into the fray, forced to pledge allegiance to one faction or the other. Proxy battles erupted in places you've never heard of, while leaders in distant capitals sat safely behind layers of security, pointing fingers and making threats. The rhetoric turned nuclear, literally. A week ago, the first tactical strike was launched. I still can't bring myself to say the name of the city that vanished in an instant. You've heard it already, I'm sure. You've seen the haunting images. Or perhaps you haven't. Maybe you were lucky enough not to. Or maybe you're like me, and those charred shadows burned into concrete walls haunt your dreams every time you close your eyes. And now here we are. No one is safe, not even here in this bunker. I received word just this morning that the air raid sirens went off in a nearby city, one of the few still standing. That's why I'm here alone, speaking into this microphone. The rest of my crew has fled, and I can't blame them. Here's the latest update from the war front. Reports confirm that Xi'an country has deployed long-range missiles targeting the industrial zones of their rival. Early estimates suggest thousands have perished, though no official numbers are available. In a retaliatory strike, the rival country has unleashed drone swarms on strategic supply routes, effectively cutting off entire regions. Refugee camps are overwhelmed, disease spreading like wildfire. There are whispers of cholera outbreaks in some areas. Hospitals are collapsing under the sheer weight of the wounded. And just moments ago, breaking news here, satellite imagery suggests the mobilization of nuclear submarines. Folks, I don't need to tell you what that means. Stories are trickling in from survivors, stories that chill the blood. A young mother clutching her baby, trying to cross a crumbled bridge as fighter jets screamed overhead. A boy, no older than 8, wandering the ruins of his home, calling out for parents who will never answer. One listener called in last night before the lines went dead. His voice was trembling. He described what he saw as he fled his city. People clawing at each other for space in overcrowded trains, soldiers firing indiscriminately into panicked crowds, a desperate man jumping onto the tracks just to escape the chaos. This isn't war, this is annihilation, but we're still here, you and I, for now at least, so stay with me. I'll keep talking as long as I can, as long as there's someone out there to listen. Maybe together, we can find a way through this nightmare. This is Radio Free Earth. Hold on. I'll be back with more updates in just a moment. Thank you for staying with me. This is Radio Free Earth, bringing you updates from the world that was and the one that's being torn apart. Let's pick up where we left off. It's day 12 of this nightmare. The situation grows darker by the hour. Here's the latest. Earlier this morning, Beijing suffered a direct missile strike. Reports suggest the attack was launched from a U.S. naval carrier stationed in the Pacific. The Chinese government has retaliated with devastating precision, targeting Guam and military bases in South Korea. The death toll is already in the tens of thousands and rising. Russia has officially declared war on NATO nations, citing its obligation to support its strategic partners. Moscow claims it successfully intercepted 2 cruise missiles aimed at its borders, though independent verification remains impossible. The Middle East. Iran and Saudi Arabia have reignited old rivalries, using the global chaos as a smokescreen for their own ambitions. Riyadh is ablaze after Iranian drone strikes, while Tehran reels from retaliatory air raids. Civilian casualties in the region are climbing to catastrophic levels. And it's not just the cities that are suffering. Rural areas, once considered safe havens, have become battlegrounds. Farmers in Ukraine report watching their fields, their lifeblood, turn into killing grounds as Russian tanks roll through villages. Entire communities are disappearing overnight, swallowed whole by the maw of war. Let me tell you a story from last night. I received a garbled transmission from a listener in Paris. He said the city is unrecognizable. The Eiffel Tower stands silhouetted against a backdrop of smoke and fire. Looters roam the streets, their faces twisted in desperation. He described seeing a young girl, no older than 12, standing alone on the Pont Neuf. She was holding a tattered doll, her face streaked with ash. She said nothing, just stared as the city burned behind her. This morning another call came in, this one from Delhi. The line was barely audible, but the voice on the other end told me of chaos in the streets as people scrambled to escape. He said the government has imposed martial law, but even the military can't control the growing riots. Food shortages have turned neighbors into enemies. He whispered something before the line cut out. The worst isn't here yet. Let's talk about how this all began. It's important to remember, even as we drown in the consequences. 2 weeks ago, the conflict began on the border between India and China. What started as a skirmish between patrols quickly spiraled out of control. Satellite footage showed artillery fire exchanged near Arunachal Pradesh, leaving dozens dead. Both sides accused the other of aggression, and neither backed down. While the world held its breath, the U.S. and its allies issued statements of condemnation. China, emboldened by Russia's support, doubled down. When India called on its allies, the stage was set for a global confrontation. Within days, alliances old and new began to mobilize. And then came the event that changed everything. At precisely 3:47 p.m. GMT last Thursday, a nuclear-capable submarine in the South China Sea launched a missile. To this day, no one knows for certain who fired first. Some blame China, others point fingers at the United States. It doesn't matter anymore. The missile detonated over a carrier group, obliterating every ship within a 10-mile radius. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Since then, it's been escalation after escalation. NATO forces have clashed with Russian troops in Eastern Europe. Airstrikes are pounding cities in both hemispheres. The nuclear arsenals of the world's superpowers are on high alert. Here's the latest casualty report, though I warn you, it's not for the faint of heart. Over 80,000 confirmed dead in Beijing alone, with countless more injured. The European Union reports 50,000 civilian deaths across its member states, primarily from missile strikes in Germany and Poland. The UN estimates that more than 10 million people are now displaced, living in makeshift shelters or wandering the wastelands left behind by the fighting. Some say this is the end of humanity. Others call it a cleansing fire, a chance to start over. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is this: we are living through history, but it's the kind of history no one will write about because there won't be anyone left to read it. I've received reports of strange phenomena, stories of people claiming to see figures moving in the shadows of bombed-out cities. Whispers of something unnatural stalking the ruins. I'll share those soon, but for now, hold your loved ones close if you can. And if you can't, hold on to hope. This is Radio Free Earth. I'll be back shortly with more updates. This is Radio Free Earth, and if you're still listening, I commend your resilience. Well, the world is unraveling faster than even the bleakest predictions could have imagined. I promised you more updates, and I'll deliver them, but first, I have to share something. There's something unnatural happening out there. It started as whispers, survivors reporting strange sights in the aftermath of bombings. A figure in the shadows of rubble-strewn streets, faint voices calling out from places that should be silent. One man claimed he saw glowing eyes staring at him from the wreckage of a collapsed subway station in London. He swore he wasn't hallucinating, but how do you prove something like that when reality itself has become unrecognizable? Another caller, a nurse working in an underground hospital in Berlin, told me about patients who survived blast injuries only to fall into a strange comatose state. She said their eyes were open, but they didn't respond to light or sound. And then after a few hours, they began to whisper. She couldn't understand the words, but she said the sound made her feel as if she was being watched. She left the hospital that night and never went back. But let's not get too far into the strange and unexplainable just yet. There's enough horror in what we can understand. Here's the latest. The United States has officially entered what the president called a state of total war. The draft has been reinstated, and every able-bodied citizen is being called to serve. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles are being fortified as potential strongholds, though what good that will do against modern weaponry is anyone's guess. China has declared martial law in all provinces, and rumors are circulating of dissent being violently crushed in the streets of Shanghai and Guangzhou. Tanks are reportedly stationed in every major city, and public executions are becoming a grim reality. Russia, in an act of open defiance, has moved nuclear warheads to the borders of Latvia and Estonia. NATO forces are scrambling to respond, but the fear is palpable. One wrong move, and it's over. Meanwhile, in Africa, chaos reigns. Many nations have been forced to take sides, often against their will. Refugees from war-torn regions are spilling into neighboring countries, overwhelming already fragile infrastructures. South Africa is seeing riots over food shortages, and in Egypt, the Nile is running red. Not with blood, thankfully, but with toxic chemicals spilled from bombed industrial facilities upstream. Now let me take you to South America. Brazil, once a bastion of stability in the region, is now engulfed in turmoil. Factions loyal to either the United States or China are fighting street to street in São Paulo. The Amazon, a refuge from human greed for centuries, is being used as a hiding place for guerrilla fighters. Fires from battles light up the jungle canopy at night, visible from space. Let's talk about the people. A woman in Mumbai sent me a message before communications went down. She described standing in line for hours at a food distribution center, only to watch it be bombed by a drone moments before her turn. She said the screams are what haunt her most, not the dead, but the dying. In a small village in Poland, I received word that the entire population has gone missing. A NATO soldier stationed nearby described finding dinner tables still set with food, toys scattered in the streets, and no signs of struggle, just emptiness. And then there's the story from Mexico City. A man called in to report that his family, along with hundreds of others, was herded into a stadium by military forces, claiming it was for their protection. The gates were locked, and no one has heard from them since. Everywhere you look, humanity is clinging to the fraying threads of survival. Here's an update on casualties. Over 5 million people are now confirmed dead globally, though the true number is likely far higher. The death toll among soldiers is staggering. Russia alone reports losing over 300,000 troops in the past week, while the US has seen nearly 200,000 casualties in the same time frame. Civilian deaths are harder to calculate, but the bombings in Tokyo, Berlin, and New Delhi have left millions of bodies buried beneath rubble. Folks, I wish I could offer you hope. I wish I could tell you that there's a plan, a path forward, but all I can do is share the truth as I see it. And the truth is, we're standing on the edge of an abyss. Stay safe. If you're somewhere that hasn't been touched by the madness yet, count your blessings and hold on to your humanity. You're going to need it. I'll be back soon. This is Radio Free Earth, signing off for now. This is Radio Free Earth. If you're listening, you're still alive. And in times like these, that's no small accomplishment. The air outside smells like ash. The sky, if you can see it through the haze, is a sickly shade of orange, like an eternal twilight. It's getting harder to tell where the days end and the nights begin. Let me bring you the latest. You deserve to know what's happening, even if knowing doesn't make it any easier. NATO has launched a massive counter-offensive against Russian forces in the Baltics. The fighting in Latvia has been described as apocalyptic, with entire towns leveled to the ground. Satellite imagery shows massive craters where cities once stood. In retaliation, Russia has deployed hypersonic missiles against key NATO supply lines in Poland and Germany. The destruction is catastrophic. Bridges, railroads, and entire highways reduced to rubble. Refugees fleeing the war zone find themselves trapped with nowhere to go. The United States has confirmed the deployment of its first wave of tactical nukes in the Pacific Theater. The targets? A Chinese fleet approaching Taiwan. Reports suggest the fleet was obliterated, but at what cost? Radiation clouds are now drifting toward Okinawa and southern Japan, forcing mass evacuations. China's response has been swift and brutal. They've launched a second wave of missile strikes against Guam, decimating what was left of U.S. Unconfirmed reports suggest Beijing is preparing to use its own nuclear arsenal if the situation escalates further. And let's not fool ourselves, it will escalate. The Middle East remains a flashpoint. Israel has mobilized its forces, citing existential threats from neighboring nations that are using the chaos as a cover to settle old scores. Entire cities in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon have gone dark. Survivors speak of skies filled with fire and streets choked with the dead. And then there are the stories, the ones that don't make the headlines but haunt the minds of those who live them. A man from Seoul called in last night. He spoke of a train station packed with people desperate to escape the city. He described how the crowd moved like a single, panicked organism, pushing toward the last operational train. The soldiers guarding the platform opened fire, claiming they were overwhelmed. He said the screams were deafening, but what stayed with him was the silence afterward. The sound of nothing but the wind and the hum of an engine carrying a train full of bodies to nowhere. In Rio de Janeiro, I heard about a mother searching through the rubble of her apartment building for her 2 sons. She found one alive, pinned under debris, but the other was nowhere to be seen. She refused to leave, even as aftershocks shook the ground. Her screams carried through the night until they stopped abruptly. In Africa, reports from Uganda tell of militia groups taking advantage of the global chaos. Entire villages are being raided, their inhabitants forced into servitude, or worse. A man who escaped described seeing his neighbors dragged away in chains, their faces blank, as if their souls had already left their bodies. Let's talk about the origins of this nightmare. It all started with that border dispute between India and China. But how did it escalate so quickly? Well, it wasn't just two nations clashing. It was years, decades, of simmering tensions, territorial disputes, and a global arms race. When the first shots were fired in Arunachal Pradesh, it was like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. The alliances made it inevitable. The United States and Japan backed India. Russia and North Korea sided with China. Europe tried to mediate, but when NATO got involved, it was game over. And then the unthinkable happened. A cyber attack on critical infrastructure in the United States. Power grids went down, hospitals lost power, planes fell from the sky. The government blamed China. China denied it and accused the US of orchestrating a false flag. No one knows who was truly responsible, but it doesn't matter now. The damage was done. Within 48 hours, the first nuclear weapons were used, not in full-scale annihilation, but as warnings. Hiroshima revisited in the modern age. I'd like to say things will get better, but lying to you would be cruel. Instead, I'll tell you this: survive, for yourself, for the people you've lost, for the chance that someday, maybe, there will be something left worth living for. This is Radio Free Earth. I'll be back soon, if the airwaves hold. Remember, you're not alone. Even in the darkest times, someone is listening. This is Radio Free Earth. Still here, still talking, still hoping someone out there is listening. Day 13, or is it 14? The clocks don't mean much anymore. The world is falling apart faster than I can report it. Every new hour brings a fresh horror, a new scar carved into the face of humanity. Let me update you on the latest movements in this grotesque dance of destruction we're calling World War III. Early this morning, Beijing retaliated for the loss of its fleet in the Pacific. They launched long-range ballistic missiles at U.S. naval bases in Pearl Harbor and San Diego. Pearl Harbor is gone, completely. San Diego is in flames, the city choked with smoke and chaos as civilians flee inland. In response, the United States unleashed its first wave of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, targeting military installations in China's interior. Satellite imagery shows vast stretches of devastation. Entire provinces have gone dark. In Europe, NATO forces clashed with Russian divisions in the frozen hell of Kaliningrad. Reports describe hand-to-hand combat in the snow, soldiers fighting over scraps of territory that will be uninhabitable within weeks due to radiation fallout from a tactical nuke detonated near the border. It's not just the bombs, it's the aftermath. Entire regions are being rendered unlivable. Radiation sickness is spreading like wildfire. In eastern Ukraine, survivors are pouring into makeshift camps, their skin blistered, their hair falling out in clumps. Here's the latest casualty count. The death toll now exceeds 20 million worldwide. That's just the confirmed numbers. Millions more are missing, presumed dead. Russia alone has lost over 500,000 soldiers. The U.S. reports similar figures. China remains silent, but leaked intelligence suggests their losses are staggering. Civilian casualties are incalculable. Cities like Tokyo, Paris, and Sao Paulo have seen death on a scale we've never known. Millions wiped out in a matter of hours. Let's talk about the survivors, the ones left to pick up the pieces, or what's left of them. A man in Paris called in yesterday, describing his life inside a fallout shelter beneath the city. He's trapped with 30 others, strangers who were forced together by circumstance. He said the air smells like sweat and fear. The food is running out and tensions are boiling over. 2 men fought over a can of beans last night. One of them didn't survive the fight. Meanwhile, in Detroit, looters are tearing the city apart. What the bombs didn't destroy, desperation will. A mother told me she was forced to kill a man who broke into her home, trying to take what little food she had left for her children. She said she still sees his face when she closes her eyes. And then there are the stories from South Asia. Entire villages in northern India and southern Pakistan have been wiped out, not by bombs, but by starvation. The supply lines are gone and the fields have been scorched. People are eating grass, dirt, anything they can find. The war began with politics, with borders and disputes and egos too big for the world to contain. But it's become something else, something darker. This isn't just a war between nations, it's a war on humanity itself. Let me share a story from Germany, a town near the Czech border, where survivors found something unexplainable. A mass grave filled with bodies. But these bodies weren't killed by bombs or bullets. They were changed. Their eyes were blackened, their veins visible beneath pale, translucent skin. Witnesses claimed to hear whispers near the site, voices speaking in languages no one could understand. Another report, this time from the Appalachian Mountains in the U.S., refugees fleeing the cities said they saw lights in the forest, bright, unnatural, moving in patterns that didn't make sense. One man followed the lights, thinking they were search parties. He hasn't been seen since. Perhaps the war has opened something we were never meant to see. Or perhaps we've done this to ourselves, unleashed horrors we can't comprehend. I don't know. All I know is this: stay alive, stay human, hold on to whatever scraps of decency you can, because when this war ends, one way or another, the world will need people who remember what it means to be human. I'll be back with more updates soon. This is Radio Free Earth. Hold on, my friends. Hold on. This is Radio Free Earth, broadcasting from the last shadows of a dying world. If you're hearing this, you've made it through another day. I'm not sure if that's a victory or just a delay of the inevitable. Let me start with the latest global updates. These aren't just reports anymore. They're a chronicle of our descent. France is gone, completely. Early this morning, the entire northern region was hit by a barrage of Russian thermobaric weapons. Paris, Lyon, Marseille, names that once echoed with art and life, are now nothing but scorched earth. Survivors are fleeing south, but the borders are closed and the Mediterranean is a graveyard of sunken refugee boats. The United Kingdom has declared martial law. Scotland and Wales are reportedly refusing to comply, leading to violent clashes in major cities. London's skyline is now marked by columns of black smoke, rising from what used to be bustling neighborhoods. In Asia, the Korean peninsula has become a wasteland. North Korea launched its entire arsenal of nuclear weapons, targeting South Korea and Japan. The U.S. retaliated with overwhelming force, reducing Pyongyang to nothing but ash. The radiation is spreading across the Sea of Japan, poisoning the water, the land, and what few survivors remain. And here in the Americas, we're not safe either. Mexico City was obliterated yesterday by a tactical nuke. The source remains unclear. Some say it was the U.S. striking against a suspected Russian base. Others believe it was Russia or China targeting U.S. allies. It doesn't matter anymore. The result is the same. Over 10 million lives gone in an instant. The U.S. itself is fracturing. California has seceded, claiming neutrality in the war, while the East Coast struggles to maintain any semblance of control. The Midwest is a battleground, not between nations, but between starving, desperate people fighting over the last scraps of food. Now let me share what I've seen. What I've heard, a group of refugees from Belarus crossed into Poland last week. They described a nightmare. A convoy of trucks carrying civilians out of Minsk was ambushed by drones. The machines didn't just kill, they hunted. The survivors spoke of mechanical eyes scanning the forests, of the cold, methodical way the drones eliminated anyone who moved. One man said he watched as his wife and daughter were torn apart by shrapnel. He doesn't even know why he kept running. In Cairo, Egypt, the pyramids are no longer symbols of ancient majesty. They're now tombs for thousands of people who sought shelter there during the bombings. The sand is littered with bodies, the air filled with the stench of decay. One survivor said he heard whispers among the dunes, voices calling his name, though no one was there. And then there's the Arctic. Yes, even the frozen silence of the north isn't spared. Reports from what remains of the scientific stations tell of bizarre anomalies. Auroras brighter than ever before, shifting unnaturally across the sky, casting shadows in places that shouldn't have light. Some scientists believe the nuclear fallout is interfering with the Earth's magnetic field. Others whisper of something older, something awakened by the chaos. How did we let it come to this? How did we let our leaders, our so-called protectors, drag us into the abyss? The truth is, the seeds of this war were planted long ago. Border disputes, resource hoarding, political posturing, they were just the excuses. The real reason? Greed. The insatiable hunger of nations too proud to share, too blind to see the edge they were racing toward. And now, as we stand on the ashes of their ambitions, it's the ordinary people who pay the price. The farmers who can no longer grow food because their soil is poisoned. The children who cry themselves to sleep in overcrowded shelters, clutching gas masks like stuffed animals. The soldiers who were told they were fighting for freedom, only to die in trenches filled with chemical clouds. Here's the latest human cost. Over 50 million confirmed dead worldwide. Another 100 million are unaccounted for. Refugee camps in Turkey, Jordan, and Sudan are overflowing, with no food, no medicine, and no hope. Disease is spreading, cholera, typhoid, things we thought we'd conquered long ago. Entire generations are disappearing. Schools are closed. Hospitals are gone. The future feels like a concept we no longer have the luxury to imagine. If you're listening, don't lose yourself. Don't become one of the whispers in the dark. Remember who you are, who you were before the world burned. This is Radio Free Earth, signing off for now. Stay safe, stay alive. I'll be here for as long as I can. This is Radio Free Earth, another day lost in the void, another day closer to whatever comes next. If you're still out there, still breathing, then you're one of the lucky ones. Or maybe not. The world isn't just at war anymore. It's unrecognizable. What's happening now can't be called war. War has rules, strategy, purpose. This is annihilation. A full spectrum purge of everything we ever built, every piece of history, every fragile dream we ever dared to have. Let's start with the latest. At 2:15 a.m. GMT, Russia launched what's being described as a hellstorm on NATO forces in the Baltic region. These weren't ordinary weapons. Survivors are reporting the use of thermonuclear devices detonated at low altitudes. The effect? Entire cities turned to infernos, the skies raining fire. Tallinn, Riga, Vilnius gone. Nothing but ash and silence. In retaliation, the United States unleashed Operation Requiem. Strategic bombers delivered nuclear payloads to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Volgograd. Reports say the blast was so intense, it shattered windows as far away as Finland. Satellite images show nothing but a crater where the Kremlin once stood. The casualty reports are meaningless now. Tens of millions, hundreds, does it even matter? These are more than numbers. These were people, mothers clutching their children as the fire consumed them. Lovers whispering final goodbyes before the shockwaves tore them apart. Entire families erased, leaving nothing behind but shadows burned into walls. And then there are the aftershocks. Stories that feel ripped straight from nightmares. Argentina reported strange lights over Buenos Aires before the bombs fell. Witnesses described glowing, almost spectral figures moving through the streets just before the explosion. Survivors claim these figures spoke, warnings perhaps, or mockery. No one knows. In northern Canada, where refugees from the US have been fleeing, something far worse is happening. The cold is unbearable, and supplies are scarce, but that's not what's driving people mad. They've started hearing voices, disembodied whispers calling their names from the frozen woods. Groups that venture out to investigate don't come back. Meanwhile, in India and Pakistan, the nuclear exchange has escalated into something biblical. Entire rivers have boiled away. The Himalayas, once majestic and eternal, are now streaked with blackened scars. Survivors describe an eerie red glow in the sky at night, a light so bright it feels like the mountains themselves are bleeding. Hold on, I have another report coming in. Breaking news out of the Middle East: Saudi Arabia has fallen. Iran, backed by Russian forces, launched a coordinated ground assault that swept through Riyadh within hours. The oil fields have been set ablaze. The fires are visible from space, massive columns of black smoke twisting into the atmosphere like the arms of some great vengeful god. Here's what's truly horrifying. With Saudi Arabia's collapse, the global oil supply is gone. Whatever semblance of transportation, energy, or infrastructure we had left, it's over. This is the death knell for civilization as we knew it. They told us it wouldn't come to this. They lied. Every leader, every general, every politician. They told us they had it under control, that cooler heads would prevail. But cooler heads don't win wars, do they? Only blood does. Let me tell you a story I heard yesterday. A convoy of refugees fleeing Ukraine was ambushed on the Hungarian border. Not by soldiers, by other refugees, men, women, and even children, driven to madness by hunger and fear. They killed each other over a single loaf of bread. One survivor told me she watched a mother bludgeon a man to death with a rock while her baby screamed in her arms. And then there are the camps. What was supposed to be humanity's last refuge has become a new kind of hell. In Jordan, overcrowded camps are being torn apart by disease. The dead aren't buried, they're burned. In South Africa, refugees rioted when the water ran out. The military responded with live ammunition. Hundreds dead. The survivors drank from puddles soaked with blood. Here's a chilling update from the Pacific. China has activated its rumored final wave strategy. Entire fleets of unmanned drones are sweeping across the islands, destroying anything and anyone in their path. They're indiscriminate, efficient, and utterly terrifying. One man from Guam described the sound they make, a high-pitched whine, almost like screaming. He said it haunts his dreams, but it's not just the machines. Reports from the Philippines tell of something else, something worse. Strange shadows moving in the waters near coastal towns. Entire villages have vanished overnight, their only warning the sound of rushing waves and an unnatural hum. Are we fighting each other, or have we awakened something else? Something older, something that doesn't care about borders or politics. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Maybe all that's left is to survive another hour, another minute. To keep the fire inside us alive, no matter how small or fragile it feels. This is Radio Free Earth. I'll be here as long as the signal holds. Hold on to whatever hope you have. It's the only weapon we have left. It's 4:27 a.m. according to the clock here. I don't know what day it is anymore. Does it matter? Days and nights blur into one endless nightmare. Time has become meaningless when the sun itself is hidden behind a veil of ash. Let me paint a picture for you. Earlier today, reports came in from Japan, or what's left of it. Tokyo Bay, it's gone. Not destroyed, not burning, not rubble. Gone, swallowed by the sea after a seismic weapon detonated offshore. They called it a tectonic destabilizer, a weapon designed not to kill soldiers, but to erase entire cities with tsunamis. Over 15 million people lived in and around Tokyo. Now there's nothing but water and silence. The survivors, they're stranded on rooftops, clinging to whatever floats as waves stained red with blood lap at their feet. Meanwhile, Australia, our so-called safe haven, isn't safe anymore. Overnight, Perth was hit with hypersonic missiles from a rogue faction believed to be operating out of the remnants of Indonesia. A witness said it wasn't the explosions that terrified him, it was the sound. A sharp, shrieking whistle that pierced the night air before the city lit up like a second sun. Survivors are describing burns so severe, they say people look like wax figures, melting in the heat. We always thought nuclear war was the end game, that it couldn't get worse, but it has. In Italy, people are fleeing into the Alps, desperate to escape the chaos in the cities. Rome has fallen into anarchy. The Vatican was overrun, priests and cardinals dragged from their sanctuaries by mobs screaming for answers. Answers to why God has abandoned us. Reports from the Alps are bizarre. Refugees claim the mountain passes are haunted. Not by people, by something else. Shadows that move without light. Voices that whisper your name from empty caves. A shepherd described seeing glowing eyes watching his group from the tree line, only for the entire group to vanish the next morning, leaving behind only the shepherd's trembling account. Now for the Americas, Canada's northern territories where so many U.S. refugees fled. They're frozen wastelands now. The nuclear fallout combined with a nuclear winter effect has plunged the region into sub-zero temperatures, even as far south as Vancouver. Food supplies are gone. Wildlife has vanished. Survivors in remote cabins are sending distress calls, begging, sobbing for help that will never come. And the United States itself, it's splintering. Martial law is the norm now, but in some places, even the military has given up. Washington, D.C. is a ghost city. Armed militias roam freely in Texas and California, fighting each other for control of resources. A survivor in New York sent a chilling message. We are the dead, walking among the ruins. We are the ghosts of a world that doesn't exist anymore. South America isn't spared either. Brazil and Colombia are locked in their own war after Brazil accused Colombia of harboring bioweapons developed by the U.S. The Amazon rainforest is burning again, not by industrial greed, but as a tactic of war. Entire tribes are being wiped out, their ancestral lands turned to ash. Do you feel it? That creeping sense of something watching us, waiting. The stories coming out of these war zones, they don't all make sense. I'm not talking about soldiers or bombs or governments. I'm talking about anomalies. In Belarus, where nuclear fallout has created a dead zone, drone footage picked up strange movement in the irradiated forests. A shimmering figure that seemed to phase in and out of sight. Some say it's radiation poisoning messing with people's minds. Others aren't so sure. And then there's Siberia. Satellite images show strange heat signatures deep in the permafrost, in areas where there should be nothing but ice. Rumors are spreading, old legends of things that sleep beneath the earth, now awakened by the chaos above, Even here in this bunker there are noises, faint, rhythmic tapping from the air vents. Sometimes at night I hear voices. They're not coming from the radio, they're coming from the walls, but I digress. Let's move on to the latest reports from the Middle East. Israel has launched what it calls its final stand. In a desperate bid to hold off advancing Iranian and Turkish forces, they've deployed every weapon in their arsenal, including weapons they swore never existed. Reports of blinding, green flashes over Jerusalem have surfaced, and people are claiming they see shadows frozen in the walls of buildings. The air itself feels charged, as if the very fabric of reality is unraveling. We used to ask ourselves, how could it come to this? But the better question is, why didn't we see it coming? Every war we fought, every division we nurtured, every line we drew in the sand, all of it led here. This is Radio Free Earth, signing off for now. If you're still alive, still human, then hold on to that humanity. It's all we have left. 4:51 a.m. now, or maybe it's p.m. Does it matter anymore? We've crossed the threshold. Let me update you on the horrors unraveling in the Eastern Hemisphere. China, it's unrecognizable. What was once the most populated country on Earth has become a shadowland. Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, they're all silent now, their streets blanketed in ash. Satellite imagery shows rivers glowing red, not from blood, but from irradiated sludge pouring into the waterways after their nuclear reactors were breached. India retaliated against this devastation with a force that even their own generals called apocalyptic. 20 nuclear warheads were launched within 90 minutes. The impact sites, major Chinese military strongholds, but also densely populated cities. Nearly 200 million souls vaporized in an instant. Yet the war didn't stop there. The Himalayas, a natural border that has stood for eons, is now ground zero for ground warfare. Soldiers on both sides describe the region as something otherworldly. Survivors from skirmishes report seeing shadows moving on the peaks, howling in languages no human knows, but every soldier claims to hear. Some soldiers refuse to advance, not because of enemy fire, but because they believe the mountains themselves are alive and vengeful. In Europe, it's no longer a continent, it's a battlefield. The NATO alliance has collapsed. Poland has been leveled, caught between Russian missile strikes and NATO's desperate counterattacks. The United Kingdom is a fortress now, having closed its borders entirely. Their air defense systems shot down a Russian plane over the North Sea just hours ago. Reports say the pilot didn't eject. He was dead long before the missile hit. His body burned and twisted in a way that defies explanation. France and Germany, they're silent. No transmissions, no reports, no life, just silence. The Eiffel Tower, once a symbol of beauty, now leans crookedly against a shattered Paris skyline, its base scorched black. Refugees from Germany speak of eerie sounds emanating from the Black Forest, metallic screeches, as if something massive is waking beneath the ground. And then there's Russia. Rumors have surfaced about something they call Perun's Wrath, a weapon designed not to destroy buildings, but to erase entire regions from existence. Reports say it creates an artificial black hole, swallowing everything. Light, sound, life, leaving behind a perfect circle of nothingness. Just hours ago, they tested it on Kazakhstan. Almaty is gone. Not destroyed, not burning, gone. A vast, empty crater now exists where 2 million people once lived. Now let me tell you about the stories that haunt my mind the most. The stories of the people. Just outside Berlin, there was a town, Lichtenau. It was small, quiet, untouched by the war. The people thought they were safe. They thought the war would pass them by. Then one day, a convoy of tanks rolled into town. Not soldiers, just tanks. The locals watched as these unmanned machines circled the town over and over for hours. When night fell, the tanks stopped and the town's electricity failed. By morning, Lichtenau was gone. Every house, every person, every scrap of existence erased. From Argentina, a fisherman's haunting story arrived over shortwave radio. He claimed to have seen hundreds of bodies floating off the coast of Buenos Aires, their faces locked in expressions of horror. The fisherman swore that the bodies were whispering things he couldn't understand, but that made his teeth ache and his bones feel like ice. Here, closer to home, the Midwest, Kansas City, you might have heard of the quarantine there, or the lack of one. A bioweapon was released. Details are sketchy, but witnesses describe people collapsing in the streets, their veins turning black as they screamed. The CDC arrived too late. Kansas City is a ghost town now. The air there, it's alive. People passing through claim to hear voices in the wind, whispers that promise salvation if you only breathe deeply. But no one who listens survives. Let's talk about the big players. What's left of them? The United States has begun deploying drones on a scale we've never seen. Entire fleets blotting out the sky. They're not just armed, they're autonomous. They choose targets. They decide who lives and dies. But sometimes they choose wrong. A family in rural Wyoming was wiped out yesterday when a drone mistook their farmhouse for a military outpost. In Russia, their underground bunkers are running out of air. The oxygen systems are failing. People are clawing at the walls, desperate to escape to the surface, but there's no surface left. Just the bitter, irradiated wasteland. And in China, the last transmission from Beijing spoke of something horrific. Refugees from the countryside have begun turning on each other, not for food, but for something else. The broadcast cut out before they could explain, but the screams we heard, I'll never forget them. There's a word I keep hearing in these stories. One word repeated over and over from soldiers, survivors, refugees, extinction. This isn't a war anymore. It's not about borders or power or ideology. It's about survival. And not just ours. There are things lurking in the shadows of this chaos that we cannot understand. And maybe we were never meant to. Maybe this was always how it was going to end. 5:22 a.m. The clock ticks on even if there's nothing left to mark its passage. I've been here for days now, watching, waiting, and reporting, but I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I suppose I owe you all something, a conclusion. But how do you summarize the end of everything? How do you wrap words around the unraveling of a species, the collapse of a world that once felt invincible? The war has spread to every corner of the globe. Antarctica, the last untouched sanctuary, is now home to battles over hidden resources. Submarines prowl beneath its icy waters, their torpedoes leaving jagged cracks in ancient glaciers. The last transmission from a stranded research team spoke of something rising from those depths. Not human, they said, before the line went silent. We've lost everything. The nations that once shaped this world are now graveyards, their flags burnt to ash. Humanity itself has fractured. Those who fight, those who flee, and those who surrender to the darkness creeping in from the edges. Here in North America, the once strong United States is now a patchwork of warlord-controlled zones. Cities like Los Angeles and Chicago are battlegrounds. Washington, D.C. no longer exists. It's a crater, a grim testament to the first nuclear exchange on U.S. soil. But it's the stories of the people that haunt me most. There's a family in Quebec. Well, there was a family. A father, mother, and their 2 children. They lived off the grid, far from the chaos. Or so they thought. Their final days were spent hiding from the fallout sweeping across the Canadian wilderness. When a rescue team found their cabin, they discovered everyone seated at the table. Plates of untouched food, but no sign of life. Only an open window and the words, "It called us," scrawled in ash on the wall. From Africa, where many hope to avoid the destruction, reports speak of strange migrations. Animals fleeing in patterns that defy reason. Deserts becoming flooded with antelope. Lions prowling frozen tundra. Survivors describe the sky there as wrong, the stars shifting and pulsing, as if mocking the last witnesses of this dying planet. And now a final update from the front lines. A coalition of what remains of NATO forces attempted to storm Moscow. The offensive was an act of desperation, an attempt to end this madness by decapitating the beast. But Moscow was ready. Satellite footage, grainy and distorted, shows the city enveloped in a dome of crimson light. Soldiers on the ground reported their weapons melting in their hands before they were consumed by what they called living fire. The retaliation was swift. A volley of ICBMs launched from Russian silos, targeting every remaining NATO base across the globe. Europe is gone. Just only silence remains. Friends, if you're still listening, I want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't bring you hope or answers, or even the faintest glimmer of light in this darkness. We were so confident, weren't we? So sure that we were masters of this planet, of our destinies. But we've learned, far too late, that this Earth is neither ours to conquer nor ours to destroy. We're passengers, fleeting and insignificant, and now we've reached the final stop. To those of you who are still alive, still holding on, I beg you, take a moment. Find the ones you love, hold them close, tell them what you've always been too afraid to say. And when the end comes, and it will come, face it with courage. Because if nothing else, we owe that to the billions we've lost. Signing off for the last time. Godspeed, my friends. And if there's anything waiting for us on the other side, may it show us the mercy we could never find for ourselves.